Hello, new humanitarian listeners. We're dropping a special episode in the feed today. It's a candid conversation about how to truly include refugees in the policy decisions that shape their lives. All the panelists and the moderator are refugees themselves and have been involved in the growing refugee leadership movement. This event was held on the sidelines of the Global Refugee Forum in Geneva and put together by the New Humanitarian's editor and reporter for migration and special coverage, Eric Reedy, along with Refugees International and Asylum Access. Some of the voices you'll hear in this episode, Sana Mustafa and Matai Muon, have also written first-person stories for the New Humanitarian's Flipping the Narrative project. It's an ongoing series that aims to put the voices of refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants at the center of conversations about the policies and events that shape their lives. You can find those stories at thenewhumanitarian.org. And without further ado, here is our panel discussion. From refugee inclusion to shifting power, building a global refugee sector that puts refugees first.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to this event. It's really good to see such a full room of people here on the last day of the Global Refugee Forum. My name is Eric Reedy. I am the migration editor at the New Humanitarian. And I would like to start this event by thanking our partners who co-organized this with us, Refugees International and Asylum Access. I am going to just say a couple quick remarks about the origins of this for the New Humanitarian, and then hand it over to Sana Mustafa, who's going to be our moderator today. So for us, this event really grew out of an initiative in a series of articles called Flipping the Narrative, which is a series of articles that aims to put the voices of people with firsthand experience of forced displacement at the center of the conversations about the events and policies that shape their lives. It's an ongoing series of articles, so if anybody is interested in contributing at any point, please reach out to me. I would love to have conversations about how to keep that series going. It also sort of is part of the New Humanitarian's efforts to practice decolonized journalism, and we are continuing those efforts by launching an Institute for Inclusive Journalism later this year, which is something that everybody should stay tuned for. Yeah, so today I think we're looking to have a really hopefully challenging and critical conversation about a topic that has been much on the agenda and at least a topic of conversation at the Global Refugee Forum, which is the refugee leadership and inclusion movement. And just sort of from my perspective as a reporter and an editor, there's been a lot of progress towards inclusion of refugee leadership in global spaces like this. But there are also a lot of tensions that exist. You know, I think it's no secret that the status of refugee policy, asylum policy, protection policy, migration policy around the world is fairly troubled at the moment, to put it lightly. And so I think we're going to dig into some of those tensions in the conversation today. So with that, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Sana Mustafa, the CEO of Asylum Access, to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Wow, thanks for being here. Full room. I'm very grateful that you chose this last event, and we'll make sure to not disappoint you. We're hoping here to have a very candid conversation and reflection on the week, but also a reflection on the last few years of the movement. My name is Sana Mustafa. I'm the CEO of Asylum Access, and my personal pronouns are she and hers. And I'm very glad to welcome you here. And as Eric has mentioned, this event is organized with Refugees International. We have our colleagues here and the New Humanitarian. When Eric and Harden and colleagues from Refugees International came to me with this opportunity, I was very excited because I was like, yes, let's create a candid conversation alternative. Let's create a space where we're going to speak truth to power on assessing this movement and what has been done so far. As I don't know how many of you are familiar with the refugee leadership movement, we are young and new to it, but many of us have, many refugees have started this work decades before us and paved the way for us. And in the last, at least I can speak for myself, in the last 8 to 9 years, we have organized together with other forcibly displaced communities, and we've come together and started demanding. At the beginning, it was self-representation and seat at the table, the basic rights. And little by little, we started demanding more bold demands, such as, well, we want meaningful participation, and now actually we want resources. We want to shift power. We want to be part of the decision making. Allies have listened. Many allies have listened. Some, still working on it. But yeah, many allies have listened, and together, and by allies we mean those who don't have the first-hand experience of lived experience of forced displacement, and we've worked together in the last 8 to 9 years in different capacities on creating various mechanisms and tools to include refugees, to start with refugees representation in the rooms and the table decision-making, then to include refugees meaningfully, to think about how we can practically shift power. What does the system look like? How do we move from exclusionary system into inclusive system? And so today we want to, myself, and this is the panel, that we all have experience forced displacement here. And we all have been leaders and advocates in this movement. And so many allies here in the room. So we're hoping to look into what are these mechanisms' effectiveness has been? What's the impact of it? Is it working? We have people from different, mechanisms, from advisor group, consultative groups, fellowships, organizations that started realizing refugee leadership journey. Where are we at in this, and how can we look forward? And I think one of the main questions we're going to get into as well is the movement getting co-opted? How can we avoid that more? And how can we make sure that this is not the future of the movement? And so we're going to start with, there's 3 umbrella questions, just so you know where we headed, and each one will answer them. And we will have time for a Q&A, hopefully 30 to 20 minutes. I also want to mention that this event is streamed on Zoom and will be recorded. And so those who are not here, we can send the recording afterwards. And we will also be sourcing questions from audience online. So please send them our way. Okay. And with that, I'm going to start with the first speaker with us. Maybe I start actually with you, Matai Muon. So Matai is a forcibly displaced person from South Sudan, and he's an advocate for refugee leadership and currently a grad student. And Matai, I want to start with a question, which will be the question to all of you. Can you share with us a short overview of your engagement in this movement? What brought you to the refugee leadership movement, and what mechanisms and efforts you've been part of? And how are you feeling about the progress of the movement at this moment?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sana, for the question. My name is Matai. I'm from South Sudan. I've lived in the refugee, situation for the past 15, 16 years. So what brought me to the movement? I think it's come from my own lived experience as a refugee in forced displacement for all that time. And then in 2020, when COVID struck, I came up with an initiative in Nairobi that support refugee youth and women, particularly from South Sudan. And so I took that initiative, to create the opportunity for the refugees, youth and women in urban setting in Nairobi. And I would say that was the beginning of me, joining the movement. All these times I've been, engaging within the movement alongside allies, as Sana was saying, with some achievement, but also with, a lot of challenges here and there. I don't know if you want me to go into the challenges right now, or we can come back later to that. Okay, thank you.
With that, I will move to the same question to Mohammed. Naeem, I have to read your title from here. Deputy Director of Strategy and Partnership at American Immigration Council and the advisor to the U.S. Refugee Advisory Board. Same question to you, Mohammed.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Mohammed. Naeem, as Sana had mentioned. Just grateful to be here. Thank you to RRI for organizing this, and of course, Asylum Access. I am new to the movement. I have been a refugee almost all my life. My family and I were from Afghanistan. I was born in Karachi, and we immigrated to the U.S. when I was quite young. So there's a privilege having been in the United States for as long as I have. I actually come to this movement because of a particular sort of intellectual curiosity. Very early on in my life, there had been some events that had happened post 9/11 when I grew up. And early in my career, I was offered the opportunity and the chance to be able to talk about what had happened. But I realized, in fact, that in many ways, I was doing a disservice to my own experience growing up by effectively just sharing the contents and the realities of my own story. And I felt like it's not that I felt like I was being used. I actually felt like ill-equipped to be able to kind of sort of hold my own in really critical, complicated, nuanced, systematic discussions. And so then I was like, you know what? I'm not doing that. And so I went back to the drawing board. I've worked in the policy space for the better part of the last decade. And then now I've returned to a different kind of space to be able to really structurally examine both the form, structure, and content of the ways in which we engage the global policy space. And my interest in being here is really thinking about the technicalities of the law, the technicalities of the system, the technicalities of the way in which money moves and who moves it, to be able to ensure that we're anchoring this movement within the context of the system that we're operating in. And so that's really why I'm here. Of course, the lived experience sustains me and continues to fuel me, but really, I'm really, really focused on the systematic design of the way in which we can shift and alter the system, meaningfully. So I'll leave it at that.
Yes, it's all about how we operationalize this and what does it mean in practice. So I'm excited to dive into technicalities with you. Maria Diez, you're the president of the Coalición for Venezuela and you're a Refugees International Fellow. Please share with us.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And my name is Ana Maria, and I am the president of Coalición por Venezuela. I am Venezuelan, forcibly displaced, now living in Spain, beautiful country. And my story, quick. I was a lawyer in Venezuela, and I wanted to be district attorney, and everything was doing great, living the dream, until, Venezuela broke up. And I shifted to humanitarian action, and I was working for HelpAge International as humanitarian protection officer. And trying to do the right thing, helping people, until I was kidnapped in order to seize a humanitarian cargo by the police with their uniforms in their patrols. And I was, kidnapped and tortured, and things happened. And I still stay in Venezuela after that. But it became too much for me. And I was already a co-founder of Coalición por Venezuela, and I was the only one living in Venezuela. So, So for my mental health went too far, and I decided to live with one suitcase and my 2 dogs. And I made it to Spain because my dad was a Spaniard. So I was doing the backward, path that my dad 45 years ago did, because he fled from Spain, running away from the civil war in Spain. So I am now elected president of Coalición por Venezuela, always an advocate, and keeping it real.
Yay, we like that. Thank you, Ana Maria. Farhad, Shamo, Roto, you're the founder of Voices of Ezidis and also a Refugee International Fellow, and you have a very specific experience as well. Could you please share with us?
Well, hi everyone. Well, answering to your question, why did I join this movement? My only answer, I can say I had no choice. That brings just to tell briefly who I am. I'm from Ezidi ethnic religious indigenous community of Iraq. I was born in 1994. I mean, many of you will give me 40 years, I think. Growing up in this community, my dad and my mom have been telling me so many times we have been forcibly displaced until 2014 when the genocide started. We survived the genocide. I personally survived with my own shoots and ended up in an internal displaced camp was built by UNHCR for 3.5 years until we get a chance to get to France and obtain refugee status. Not having choice because the whole community was destroyed. And then we started working. I just started to do not accept to suffer silently anymore. I was hearing 2 stories of fathers and mothers like our ancestors. They so longly suffered silently. So my choice was to not suffer anymore silently and to not die silently. That is why I joined, and then gladly to see this movement, this international organization that have acknowledged that and that have understand that at the first stage. After they understand, And I think now you can see with Refugees International, they start to believe it. Here, my closing remark to this. I think everyone understands that's a meaningful leadership, representation, activity of the refugee leaders, people with experience. Everyone of us understand that is needed, but not everyone believe in that. When I started my work, I started to believe that I can do something. And now if you, the funders, the governments, if they start to believe in it, change will be shown so quickly and more sustainably. But now the government understand, but they don't believe in it. We have to make them believe in it, Sana.
We are. Thank you, Farhad. So you all, again, like you all come from this we all come from this lived experience, right? And I always, people when we talk about recruitment and hiring more refugees and inclusion, people be like, how do we do that? And I think actually I want to answer this question because the way we framed it at Asylum Access, that lived experience is a skill. It's something you can't learn in schools, you can't read in books, and it is a skill that's required to do the job. And so here's a tip of you put it in the skills required when you want to recruit people with lived experience of forced displacement. Back to you, Matai. You and I both have contributed to Flipping the Narrative initiative by the New Humanitarian to center refugee voices on shaping the narrative on forced displacement. And this is one of the mechanisms that we are part of and you are part of. Can you please, on this mechanism and other mechanisms, give your views on what's working well with these mechanisms that aiming to include refugees, maybe challenges, barriers, but also successes?
That's really an important question. Let me begin with what is working. What is working is that based on, flipping narrative that I contributed to, it led to why I'm here sitting in front of these people. So I think that's important because it gave me the voice, to share my insight, share my lived experience with this community who come from different places. So I think that's something that has been consistent in terms of advocacy, to put refugee leaders in front of the world, people who come from different places who might not have the lived experience that we have, which of course is a skill that I agree with you. And in fact, it should be part of the recruitment strategies for some of the organizations. So I think that's something that is very, very important. It gave us that power to connect the world and share our stories. What is not working? So when I got the opportunity to share my story with the New Humanitarian, I got it through a Google form, and there are thousands, if not millions, of refugees who cannot access Google form, because Google form has the implication to be connected to internet, you must have a laptop and all these kind of things. So I think that kind of imperative need to change for New Humanitarian and for other organizations. If they want to get refugees, they need to, also consider the fact that refugees are not the Hafsar refugees that Matai Muon was part of. There are refugees in the camp, that also need to share their stories. So I'm trying to say that, within the refugee space, we are not equal. There are those who are more equal than others. And I think that really need to be considered, not only by the New Humanitarian, but by other organizations. So I'm happy that I got the opportunity, but I think much need to be done, in terms of access, in terms of getting the real refugees, who are struggling and grappling, with life, and who also want to contribute to this space in one way or the other. Yeah.
Thank you, Matai. Actually, I'm going to have a follow-up question on that to you as well. What do you feel the impact of, have you felt or sensed from your own experience and around you, the impact of contributing to such mechanism and being part of such mechanism on your life, on policymaking, on the narrative?
Yes, I would say there's been some positive impact because, sharing the refugee narrative by refugees, I think itself is powerful because my story is my story. How I present it, how I share it with the world is more authentic than someone writing it on my behalf. And since, the article was published, so there's been some, level of engagement, some visibility that I think would not have been possible if, that story was just published by the new humanitarian without my contribution. So I think that has been a tremendous impact. Yeah.
I'm glad. Thank you. Mohammed, so you're a part of the U.S. Refugee Advisory Board and other mechanisms. Curious on your reflections.
Yeah, and I have a number of my our advisors with me. Basma Alawi's over here, whom probably this whole room knows. Yeah, I'm going to focus my this portion of my remarks on three elements here: sort of the narrative in and around the work, the policy making in and around the work, and then the capacity building in and around the work. On the narrative side, I chair the U.S. Refugee Advisory Board. Separately, I'm a deputy director at the American Migration Council, and so on the narrative side, I think there are two elements. And Rez Gardi yesterday at our event that we held at the Impact Hub talked about norms, right? In a lot of ways, some of that, so much of the responsibility to shift some of the norms of the international system often relies or sits at the feet of refugees. But I would challenge every single one of you that you and your institutions are also vital and critical for establishing a new norm around refugee engagement and participation. Because you have different positionality in the ecosystem, you have different kinds of competencies and capacities, and also I might not be the trusted messenger for the people that you're talking to. You might be the trusted messenger for the people that you're talking to. And so as someone who dedicates so much of my career, the last half decade has been about strategic communications, I want to put our movement in the best position to be able to make its case. And sometimes I am not the one to make that case. And I am perfectly okay with that. And I know that might come as a slight challenge to our movement in our field, but I really strongly believe that. On the policy side, representation matters, but ensuring that there's competency in the seat, right? And so another layer in that. So I'm just gonna call out Basma here, right? So Basma's leading the transformation and resettlement across the United States. She has the competency, the skill set, but also the lived experience, right? And again, if you lack the competency and you're sitting in that seat, you're doing a disservice to the entire movement, right? And look, again, that's a challenge to our movement to ensure that when we put ourselves in a position of leadership, that we're effectively stepping into that leadership, but more importantly, we can hold that seat. I don't want to be invited into a room. I want to be sitting at the seat. And I think there's a lot of focus on being just inside the room. I am not very interested, honestly, I'm not very interested in just being in your rooms. All right. I'm an intellectual equal and I expect to be treated that way.
Yes.
And then, and then the third layer, which is the capacity building, and this is both a challenge to governments as well as philanthropy. We as a movement need the financing to be able to build the social norming and behaviors of the movement, because we are also going through challenges as a movement goes through. I'm in the immigration movement in the United States with a lot of friction, a lot of fracture, a lot of polarization, a lot of competition. But we have to get together as principals to be able to work through some of that sort of relationship and some of that relationship building, because we ourselves need trust, and the work flows at the currency of trust. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well said, right? I agree. I think you mentioned 2 points I want to reflect on and maybe have a follow-up question. The first one is the game of the political identities, right? Identity politics. And I think the tokenistic representation, when you bring someone who has the lived experience of forced displacement, so has the label, and you check a box, but they could not be actually competent for where they sit, and they're doing a disservice. So I think the question that you bring and the advice to all allies to think beyond the political identity into more who is in the seat and how they are leveraging it and are they the right fit is a very important point you bring up. But your point about capacity building, yesterday we were in a conversation and I think that I think probably there's a difference, but I want you to highlight the difference yourself. Yesterday we were in a conversation talking about decolonization of the movement. And one of the main issues that was brought up is how capacity building, that how allies, on the sector moved into just build capacity for refugees. It's a very top-down kind of colonial approach, immediately assumes that people don't have the capacity. My understanding though from you is that you're not talking about leadership training for refugees. You're talking about space for the movement to struggle and to build itself. So can you elaborate a bit on that, please?
Yeah, I'll start off with forgiveness, because I think forgiveness is an important place to start. As I'm assessing, again, I'm new to the refugee movement, but I assess systems as part of my work. And so I'm looking at the system and I'm saying, okay, there's sort of gradations to the system. There's a spectrum here. There's a part of the spectrum that is focused a lot on volume of engagement, volume of presence. I would argue that it's probably more strategic to focus on the quality and the substance of the movement. That might mean more limited engagement in specific areas and places, but I firmly believe that the process is the product. And what I mean by that is the way in which we do this work, that's the capacity building, but forgiveness is necessary for the movement to be able to figure itself out a little bit. That's where I want to start off and at the place of forgiveness. And then the second point is we want to be co-collaborators in helping to build the structural elements of who's doing what, where they're doing. Again, philanthropy is a powerful convener, so you have a role in that. Governments are important conveners, you have a role in that. Everyone has a stake. Everyone has a stake in the makings of this movement, just like we have a stake in the makings of this movement. But it's often we're holding all of that stake and all of that risk and all of that liability. I would argue that everybody has a stake in it. So I'll just leave it there because I know, Sana,
perfect.
Like you're tight on time. So.
I know. No, this is actually perfect. So a message to take away is around for allies, the importance of collaboration, but also give us space and time to make mistakes. No pressure on us. Anna Maria, I want to come to you. You're a Refugee International Fellow. It's one of the mechanisms that Refugees International launched to include refugees in policymaking. Can you elaborate? Can you share your experience so far and candidly, what has been good about it? What's working well? What could work better?
Amazing. It was amazing,
Yes.
really, because I am also participating in other, spaces like that. Welcome. So I can see the high difference on the space that we have to have a voice without being, with parts deleted and, political right about it. So we actually have a voice at the fellowship program, and also the support, constant support, and very professional, high-level support that also enhance our voice because we have lived experience. We also have skills, but being in the room with an organization that has access to every single space and has gained this respect, so levels up to another level. So in my experience, I got to share this because I did a joint trip with Marta Guerrero, which is the advocate for the labor market access to Colombia, to do some research about, integration of Venezuelans and institutions engaged. And I was looking for a meeting with any government official in Colombia, like for, I think it was 7 months since I, been in the presidency, and they didn't even reply, like receive or something. And I was like, the crazy lady in the square of the people shouting at the moon. And once that Marta, sent an email, the whole agenda was packed. And I was so welcome with so many institutions. And Marta said, like, listen, we're here and we want to know about this. And Anna, that's your cue. So this should not happen because we should have access. We should be, fully acknowledged as legitimate stakeholders in this process. And Refugees International has supported us in every single step, but also in the policy making level, how to, make the theory of change with the wider scope, things like that. Mark's smiling because he knows. And things like that has been really, really, really a rich process for us. And I'm looking forward to see the next fellows and give them a hug.
Amazing. I want to highlight about the fellowship. It's a mechanism by Refugees International to include refugees in policymaking. And one of the main advantages and the important things that we had in conversations of co-design was compensation. You are all compensated, not for free, and meaningfully compensated. Not like just per DMs. And I think so. You mentioned the importance of such mechanism in providing access to spaces, connection building, the ability to refine your thinking on policymaking. If someone was here considering developing a fellowship, what else would you tell them to do?
Do it. And also it will be a good idea on more regional level for other institutions, organizations to duplicate this good example, because it is amazing the access that we had, and also the learning, and also the friendship. This has been an incredible experience. And also, I'm not gonna mention any other organizations that we know who they are, but we have tons of work without fair compensation, or even, having acknowledged the workload that we receive into our shoulders. And you can see the difference, like it's the elephant in the room.
Yeah, some organizations that like hosting us here, like UNHCR. Anyway, Farhad.
Well, yesterday at the Impact Hub, I was sitting down, so it was like just physical, but it has been like that in the process of, like, they put us, but whenever they find us, we struggle, they just cheering, we are here, you're not struggling alone, we're struggling together. So we have been really completing each other in the field, in the cause of, particularly my cause, the cause of Ezidi community. We were, by mid-November, we were in Seros, northern Greece, the camp of asylum seeker, where we have thousands of Ezidi and other communities. Yael was with us. So the expertise that Refugees International put in the trip, it was really supportive and ensuring that we're going to do something very impactful and deliver a message. Second thing, of course, the expertise that I had with the communities, getting to the car, speaking to 100 people, giving hugs to women, we had drinking chais. Yael didn't have that. So, we were really completed. The language, understanding what's the issue. Like one woman was saying, I have like a rock on my heart. I am the only one who was understanding this. There is, so the culture. So while you have an expert, someone experienced from the culture, know the language from this. So I'm just like saying, every crisis, every massacre, every displacement has its own characteristics like that can be separated from. So I know the refugee crisis, we have so much in common, but we are really different also. So here in these spaces, like with other fellows, we are, how can I state this? We are really valuing our similarities, like we are celebrating our differences, which have not been the case. To end with Refugees International, I really feel included, which was not been the case for me personally and my community as a whole for centuries. We have a huge fear and trauma of being excluded always, but I did feel included. So thank you.
Yeah, Anna Maria, thank you for that.
I would say that the final word would be respect. I have felt this respect, and I got your back, because it is really hard to run this, to lead this, the biggest network of NGOs in the world, led by Venezuelans, migrants, and refugees, and being under 40 years old, and being Latina, and being a woman. And sometimes people take me for granted. And they show up and say, listen, you should listen to her, and you should show some respect, because we do.
Yeah. Yes. Hafsar, hello, welcome.
Hello.
Hafsar is the Co-Secretary General of APRRN Asia Pacific Network for Refugees, and I'm so glad we have you here with us. I will give you just an overview of what you could share with us, but if you can share a short overview of your participation and your role in the refugee leadership movement, and where we were talking about the different mechanisms of inclusion and assessing them a bit. So your reflections.
Thank you. Is it working? Apologies that I was late. I got messed up with my different meetings. Just one correction is I am representing Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network. It's a little bit different from APRRN, but APRRN is also born out of us, so we are almost together. So inclusion, I've been thinking about it. Just to give you a little bit of a background of who I am, I have been, and I am now. I have lived 26 or 7 years of my life as someone who have been deprived from citizenship in Myanmar as a Rohingya. And I then also have lived as a refugee for another decade plus in Malaysia and also in Thailand. Now I am in New Zealand, resettled 4 years ago. So it has been constant constant and ongoing struggle for me to be able to speak on behalf of my people and then also others like me. So one thing that I realize constantly is that when people invite you for a table, they expect you to be really grateful. And then I was so resonating one of the quote that somebody said, you know what? Meaningful participation is not a privilege, it's a right. Nobody should feel like I have to thank you because you have me. So it is really resonating for me. Also, as I am in this advocacy spaces in different many capacities, I'm also thinking about how do we do this inclusion? How do we do this meaningful participation? Is it only refugee does that? Is it only UNHCR do that? Is it only INGO? Is it only civil society do that? Then I come to a realization, any movement, social movement, whatever it is, we need everybody on board. Otherwise, there's going to be always a pushback and pull and push. So we need everybody on board. And by doing that also, we need to be really critical about ourselves. The self is really, really important sometimes because we're so focused on external factor of excluding us. We then fail to look at the exclusion from within. So that is something that I realize also because it is very human thing for the oppressed community, for somebody with lived experience who have been constantly excluded and who have nothing in your life. For the first time when you have something, you just want to hold on to that. It's so good for the first time being recognized and this is the platform. And then with that also come, we then sometimes feel, oh, now I have been in these places. I am speaking for many other people. Then who am I excluding from my own community? And who I can, one example is that if now I'm in New Zealand, I can travel, I have refugee travel documents, then it's become my responsibility. How about others in Cox's Bazar refugee camp? How about somebody stuck in the IDP camp of Myanmar? Can I speak on their behalf? Is my experience exactly the same as them? If not, looking at the webinar, looking at the situation, who will add more values on that things than me being on that thing? So then also become really important for us to be critical about my representation and my leadership, and then am I doing it? So also one thing that I have been reflecting after, a leader from New Zealand, Jacinda, before election, she said, oh, I don't have what it takes to be in this space anymore. It requires so much of mental capacity. So I am leaving this space, giving to someone else. That was so admirable for me. So as a decent leader, as a decent advocate and activist, it is also really important to be critical. I'm not blaming myself. I'm also something that has been in my mind a while, that to know that when and if we don't have what it takes to be in this space, because the journey that we have been is so hard. The mental capacity it takes to be in this advocacy space is too difficult. It's also very important for us to take a pause and then give that space to somebody who will do a lot more than us. And at the end, I just want to remind all of us, including myself, is that it is not about the person, it is about the cause. It's really, really important. Causes versus person. Is it about Hafsar being in this panel, or is it about what is it that we want to achieve out of this? So it is something really important. And again, going back to how does the inclusion of my journey has been, and also my observation of other people with lived experience exclusion. As still, I will say that I'm not convinced that we are there yet. We are still at the very beginning of the journey. And again, it will require a lot of us having this uncomfortable, safe conversation about really understanding. I want to acknowledge as well, it is not fair to only blame to the big INGO and organization who hold all the power. It is also our responsibility to be in it together with them, for them also to open up for us. Okay, Hafsar, we want to do A, B, C, D, E, F, but this is our barriers, funding, blah, 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 security. Also for us to be able to talk about that. Yes, I want to participate every bloody single thing that you invite me, but then the topic that you're asking me to talk about will risk my life and my family life. And then for me to be there, it requires to take unpaid leave from my job and to be there. So also having all this conversation and really understanding about what is that holding us back to do this, and finding solution together in that sense. Also, one other thing that I want to mention is that I think we are so used to playing safe. INGO, us refugees, we love to play safe. We have to stop playing safe. If we want to see the impact, you gotta make a bold move. Even if it's involved risks, if we never take the risks, we're never going to see any significant change. And I have been thinking about it. Well, since day one that I was born, I have lived and seen this for how many decades now? Now you're going to know that how old I am. 3 decades above. Now we're dealing with the same shit. So it is a very significant to me that we are not doing something right. Why are we playing safe? How many more lives will it take for us to come to this realization is that we must take risks. Even if it takes, really making the bold step and to see the impacts. So the inclusion and meaningful participation is ongoing process, and it requires all of us to be critically reflect about the privilege and power that we hold. I am going to insist to say that even if you are a refugee leader, even if you are an asylum seeker leader, you still hold something and you have a privilege and a power. Me, compared to other refugees in Cox's Bazar, even if I'm traveling with now 1951 Refugee Convention, I don't have a citizen, but I'm still a lot more privileged than those refugees who are stuck in the Kakuma refugee camp and Cox's Bazar and stuck in IDP camp. So I need to be really mindful of the privilege and the position that I hold, and am I sharing it enough with others whose voice will be really critical in this space? Am I making enough effort for their inclusion as well? So inclusion requires different level or layer of thinking through critical reflection and making sure that everybody is there, because it is about everybody. It is not about me. It is not about only one person. It is about the causes. It's not about the person.
Thank you, Hafsar. Well said.
I just wanted to thank you bringing this important point. That like taking risk is, I think, is a part of the process of working in the field. That is always possible, and also acting as a value. When act is one of our value. I mean, I can speak on myself. When we see something wrong, something happen, we just act. We don't hesitate. We don't think. We just act. Like this is how it have been. But here it brings us to the root issues, to add on what you mentioned about the changing policies. The justice for all these crises have been missing all over the world. Justice have not happened. We do not work on fixing the root of the issues. The people who started the war, the people who killed, the people who made massacres. Where is that justice? That has to be also one of the future realization of really focusing on the root issue. Impunity have been terrible. People kill, make hundreds and thousands disappear, and then look, like Syria, Bashar Assad now getting re-recognized. And here we are just wasting time. Of course, it's important to work on bringing camps and give foods and try to help, but we have to speak up, even it takes, in my experience, many times, it could have taken my life.
Very important point. I think, Farhad, thank you for saying that, because I think also many of us don't want to be political, want to be humanitarian, right? And that we are not refugees who fell from the sky like this. They're crimes that forced us out, and advocating for that. And I know this is part of the fellowship goal, and my sister is a fellow with them, with all of you as well, and to focus, for example, in our case, on the issue of forced disappearance and the normalization with the war criminals. We are, as refugees, going to advocate for that as well, not only for refugee leadership and to be included. I think the issue is that we're not getting to that, because first we're fighting to get into the room. But when we are getting into the room, everyone wants to talk also again about refugee inclusion and leadership. And I want to talk about the other things, including our rights. So thank you for bringing this up. Mohammed, you wanted to add something?
I can actually cover it in the final question. Yeah.
Great. So on the final round, what's the future of this movement? We've talked about mechanisms that doing well, right? And there are ones that could do better. We also talked about, a moment of tokenization that's happening. We talked about a lot. Hafsar mentioned the importance of also the work that we do on the movement side. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on two levels. What's the future? What's the success of a future movement would look like with allyship, and also on the movement side within us, the communities? Maybe I can start with you, Matai.
Yeah. Before I answer that, if I can add my reflection to what I think a lot has happened since the last question. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I need to also add my voice to it, particularly the question of quality that my colleagues here talked about. I think it needs to be emphasized. Quality in the sense of, in terms of how do we get the refugees on board? Where do we get them? I think that's really very important. It begins with how we recruit them, like the Refugee International Fellowship. but also it speaks to the question of the diversity, of the quality of a conversation that we have, and how they they engage and contribute to that space. I want to share an experience, from a colleague of mine who was given an opportunity to go to the World Economic Forum as one of the global shepherds, and he was coming from Kakuma. And so when he went there, he had a note, something that he wanted to talk about. But before he did the presentation, that note had to go through, a lot of editing and all those kind of things. And by the time he delivered, it had already lost its value in that aspect. And I think it's really, really very important, to underscore the fact that as we are talking about lived experience as skill itself, if you are coming from Kakuma and you already have a speech, I understand that, sometimes product that is, produced by refugees, the quality is always questioned, which I think really need to be looked at. Because my ideas, if I put them on the paper, this is what is happening around my community. So it's not going to be changed, edited without my permission, or at least we want to edit it and then it, to please other people, at least try to keep the message, the central message, the idea. I think that's really very important for a lot of organizations that are present in this room. So now talking about the future. So the future of the movement, I would say I'm quite pessimistic. Not to say that, there are no challenges ahead, but I think, the future is bright in that sense. But what needs to happen is, we need to have the critical engagement that my colleague talked about, in terms of the level of participation, but also in terms of the messages and how we deliver them. That need to happen between and among the, different stakeholders. If we are to continue, we need to question the current engagement, the participation that we have, and that also connect to the question of quality. So we are not just going to quantify the number of refugees that are present at the Global Refugee Forum, but we need to question, the quality of their engagement, and then, how they affect, the policy outcome at the end of the day. Because I think the next 4 years we should talk about different things, not about how, how many refugees are coming, where are they coming from. Maybe we should talk about, how do we dispense the funding that is needed? Where should it go? Because my experience that a lot of funding has happened, in the past few years, but it's also being mismanaged at the state level. That is, a question of its own. I don't know where it feeds based, but I think it's really, really very important. International funding framework is not being managed the way it should, at least at the local level. I think that is, something we need to consider.
Thank you for saying that. Quality of participation, we're going to assess next GRF.
Yes. Yes, my colleagues have touched on, I think, the distinctions between the policy making and the policy decision. So two different realities, two different contexts, different stakeholders. In an increasingly in a context where Western democracies and overwhelmingly the largest donors to UNHCR, their countries and societies are dealing with acute levels of polarization. And because of that kind of political environment, the decision making happens amongst a narrower and narrower and narrower sliver of people. Current context in and around the wars that we are facing in the Middle East, in Gaza in Israel, in Sudan, etc. These are state-based realities, but in effect, they're also political. And some of the bodies in which we operate do not have a political strategy. So we're applying a humanitarian protection framework to sometimes what are inherently political realities. And so as a result, I think we are ill-equipped, allies are ill-equipped to be able to center our perspectives, because honestly, what is our positionality in shaping that political context? So I'm going to focus on a few things. I don't have solutions, but I have some broad meta narratives here. Sorry, I wrote it on my iPad. that I never use. And today I was like, I'm using this $500 thing that I bought. So here's the reality, right? Number one, right? The social context is forcibly displaced people. There is an implicit perception of dependency across the institutional realities, where we're only seen as recipients of aid. That is an incredibly dominant kernel of a narrative. When systems see you as simply a recipient of aid, they cannot reimagine you in a seat of power in making that decision. That is really critical. And that might rub some of you the wrong way. I'm fine with that, right? Number two, but the reality then is that actually that perpetuates some of the racial inequities that are built into that system. When we talk about decolonization, we are effectively talking about the colonization, the perpetual longstanding racial biases and the perceptions that we are often afflicted under. Now, what I actually would challenge you is that, in fact, when we talk about democratizing systems and democratizing a system, you have to be an inclusionary system. In effect, it's to your advantage and gain because you both increase the legitimacy of the system. Two, transparency is important, right? That's the policy making, transparency. When you said decisions were made on the draft of a speech that then came out and said, well, this is not even the thing that I delivered, right? So there's that transparency. And then there's another thing, and sort of like the last sort of element here, which I really want to touch on. There remains to be a power imbalance, unfortunately. I don't think that power imbalance is going anywhere, right? And so, but I do actually functionally believe that there are a unique set of both lived competencies, but again, I want to really strengthen the case for the quality of that engagement to be able to sort of continue to push us forward. I was a little bit all over the place, but if there's anything that you take away from what I just said, is that we are inherently dealing with conflicts because of the political dynamics, and decisions are being made by a narrower and narrower sliver of individuals. And I think that is a really huge challenge for us as a global refugee movement and how we shape that. And the way to do that is to really understand the systemic design in which that policy making happens, so that we ultimately get to the point of a better policy decision and being at the seat when the decisions are made. So, yeah.
Amazingly said. Thank you so much. Yeah, you know, this depoliticization of people who work in the sector of refugees is not a coincidence, right? I think it's by design that we are asked to be apolitical and unbiased, and that's why we get nowhere. And as if work rights is not political, or, you know, the right to move is not political, the right to exist here is not political. So thank you for bringing that
It is
up.
impossible to not be political in this moment.
Be comfortable being political.
It is impossible. And I am very, very comfortable being political. Very comfortable. Because, heck, the aid of convoys is like, it's a humanitarian issue, but politicians are making them, right? And I think that is a really important context and reality. Again, it's no criticism against any one government. It's criticism on the entire system, including all of us. So I'm very comfortable being political, because if that's the approach, that's the game that's being played with me, heck, let's roll.
Agreed. Thank you. Anna Maria.
Awesome. I don't know what to say after that, but
I'm sure you have a lot to say.
Yes. I mean, listen, meaningful refugee participation and the full integration of refugees is not optional. This needs to happen and will happen. The conversation that we should be having in this forum is how to do it faster, more approachable, more accessible, more respectfully, because otherwise we will still, losing lives, losing opportunities, wasting donors' money, and nothing changed. So also, I don't know, I got this sense that meaningful and participation has like different definitions depending on who is in the room, but it's really clear. It's not that hard, actually. Refugees International has done it. I mean, several organizations has done it. The New Humanitarian has done it. I mean, it's not that complicated. And yeah, it's not. And also, governments, institutions, and organizations needs to lose this fear of, include refugees and allow them to have a voice. Because in our experience for Latin America, in every single space, whether it's local, it's national, it's regional, that we have, had this space in the table for decision making and for policy making, the results are amazing. Amazing. I cannot tell you enough how amazing experience this has been. So let's lose this fear about including refugees. And also about the politics. About the politics. Everything is around politics. So decision making for a start, Venezuelan crisis 101. We are refugees. We are refugees, and nobody's saying that. The real question is, which one of us is a migrant? So, yeah. And every time that a government, whether it's in Latin America or in a different country in the world, changes presidency, the politics change, and it shouldn't. It should be around human rights. And then go take a picture with the Venezuelan regime, and no, Venezuela is fine. People are getting back, and it's not. And there is no crisis. There is no refugees in the world. And we are 8 million people in the world, and people still coming out of Venezuela. So this has to be said out loud, and policy making and the decisions should be around human rights, because otherwise, what does it work to having, 75 years celebration of the Human Rights Declaration and beautiful events and the Oscars that they had this week and fancy palette. Nothing changes if we don't see the reality as it is. And I think that's it, because I want to keep this last message. Venezuelans are refugees.
Take notes. Yeah.
Anna, when we meet in first virtual session, we said we're going to be friends. Okay, first 10 minutes. Yeah. So that's what happened actually. So when we say we're not in politics, that's our politics basically, because we have a lot of fear, as you just said. But let's not forget, we are all speaking about policy making, new laws, but we have to think about implementation of this policy. That is something has to be considered. Look, genocide convention have happened after Holocaust, but how many genocide have occurred after Holocaust? Because it was not implemented correctly. It was not respected correctly. So for all of us, we have to think about the implementation and evaluation. For example, Refugees International follow, I think evaluation of every step we do in both is a two-way street. What Farhad has done in the field, what Refugee International have provided, the donor, the states, I don't know who will be that ready to evaluate that, but that's what we need. We have to admit our mistakes. So to conclude, I would say what's coming, answering your question. I will be more practical. I agree what you said. I'm just building more practical in the refugee side. I just reflected on 4 things in my head, actually. Access to opportunities and education. We are not only speaking about us, a few people here. We're speaking about millions. Justice and accountability. Well-being and healthcare. That's including psychological support, which is not there. I had 7 months. I had attack. I spent 7 months to find a psychologist. I found it out that I told my story. She was crying. Yeah, I was taking care. Are you okay? I will be lighter on you. Healthcare, well-being, that is important for the leaders specifically. I've been taking testimonies of over 2,000 Ezidis survivors. I see myself in every one of them. And sometimes I forget myself. Actually, I was in that region. And then the translator, the lawyer saying, okay, Farhad, we know you're into that, but you have to. So they are, so that's the 4th thing. Well-being, healthcare, access to education and opportunities. justice and accountability, which something I find is very important. Imagine in the justice side of my work, I find some terrorists that have been declared death are safe in Europe going around. There is a huge corruption. Let's not die with these fears. Let's just speak up. And whenever anything bad happens, for myself, I will run away somewhere else. That's what I've been doing. I ran from Sinjar to north to Syria, Syria to Turkey, Turkey to France. Within France, I ran. I will run from France also. That's how we will speak up. The truth that have been put into effort to be hidden have to be said. Yeah, thank you.
I just want to highlight something Farhad mentioned, mental health support and trauma support. And this is one of the things we work on. It's about trauma-informed practices, but also I know in the next iteration of the fellowship, there will be support for mental health and well-being of us, because we're just expected to show up like this and no one knows what happens in the background and what we feel and what we deal with daily. So thank you for bringing this up, Farhad. Hafsar?
Can you hear me? A lot of my colleagues has already covered. I'm not going to repeat the same thing, but I think there is one element to resistance to change is the fear of losing power, the fear of losing their space. Right. So it is really important for us to address that fear. Why? What are you afraid of by giving this to the people who live experience? We need to address that fear. We need to get rid of it. It's not going to be very easy moving forward. The other thing is that it's also really important for all entities involved, including us, knowing the why. Why do we do that? Why inclusion? And then now we know the why, and what do we do? And then now we know the what, and how do we do that? So all these three things are really important element that we need to think about. And I'm also thinking about in my head, many refugee leaders and representatives who don't speak English, who don't have the rights to travel like me here in this room. I'm speaking on the behalf of all these grassroots people. So the reason that I'm speaking is I was here in Global Refugee Forum in 2019. I never had the right to properly study in the past, so I don't hold PhD or master or whatever. I just arrived to New Zealand 5 months ago. And then all I have is so much passion in my heart, the lived experience that I have lived as refugees and all that, and also a non-binary person, and so much. And I have so much to give. I want to talk, but then my fellow refugee leaders were sitting right here in front of me. And one day they were forming a group of this movement. I said, can I be a part of it? They were, no, Hafsar, it's still too early. Because I don't have what all of them have, because they have a little bit of privilege than me. They have been resettled, 10 years ago, I don't have it. They excluded me. And then at that moment, I bow. I will never, ever exclude my fellow refugees and people with lived experience under any circumstances. Just because they don't hold such degrees, just because they don't speak that English, it doesn't mean incredibly important lived experience inside they bring is not important. It is really important. In fact, it is essential. It will be unfair for me to assume that I understand all the refugee situation in different part of the world. I don't. I only have what I have lived through. And it's really important for us to know that all the barriers that we have to be included, and are we actually including people? And also, I was really sick, if I can be very blunt, seeing the same one or two leader UN darlings everywhere, in every webinar, every meeting. I am sick of it. To be honest with you, I don't want to see myself the next refugee forum here. I have done it twice. It has to be someone else. I don't want to speak anymore. If I can, I just want to be behind the scene and mentoring the younger people. Okay, you go now, the new voices, because there's a lot of news and emerging issues happening. Also, one other thing, very resonating with my other colleagues mentioned about the sustainability of this meaningful participation, the sustainability of this refugee leadership, because sometimes, I enjoy a big organization and all these people, okay, we tick the box, you in one meeting, we give you a training, 6 weeks done, certificate, and then what? Done? So we need to really critically think about sustainability of that leadership, that participation, so they can have an impact. It's really important to think about impact. It's not about only ticking the box, okay, now it's done. give you the certificate. I have invited you to 2 events. Goodbye. So it's really important element to think about too. Also, very resonating. We are so capable human beings. We are not incapable. We are not the burden. That shifting the language and narrative has to change. I was not very happy when many different countries talk about burden sharing. We are not the burden for you to share. We are your bloody responsibility to share, because you fail when these things are happening at the beginning. When the war is emerging, you choose to remain silent. When there's a whole lot of refugees in different part of the world, now you are calling us the burden. No, I refuse to accept that terminology. That is very important language change. We have to be mindful of that.
Thank you, Hafsar.
Going back to that, to keep this movement alive, we need to get this whole of society approach. Then that include reflecting, criticizing the people who hold power, the bigger people and policymaker, as well as ourselves critically reflecting. So the leadership is very interesting thing, because different people have their definition and understanding and meaning of leadership in a very different way. But there is 2 things that resonate me. When I think about the leadership, this guy mentioned leadership is service. Leadership is not you holding the mic and being on the stage. And also one thing that resonates to me so much is that the true leader will always create more leaders. The true leaders will not create more followers. So it is something that we need to be really critically think about ourselves to make sure this movement of meaningful participation and inclusion is sustainable and impactful. That's all from me.
Thank you so much. We're actually on time, like in terms for questions. Like we're 1 minute behind, so that's great. You wanted to say something before we take questions?
Norms. You said something very critical. I did share it yesterday at our panel. You said something about burden sharing. That's creating a norm, right? Go back to sort of Reza's point yesterday. It's creating a norm amongst the cascade of obviously the entire system. But then, and I spoke about this yesterday, but the 1951 convention has both signatories and non-signatories. If you study the speeches of the non-signatories, they in fact are using burden sharing quite a bit. And they are creating a precedent dangerously across the system that signatories are also in view of. We have non-signatories to the 1951 convention creating a precedent normatively across the UN system. Let's be real here. That seems to me an entirely complicated and ironic reality. However, the reality is it is happening. And what do we do about it? I don't have a solution to that, but it is contextually a reality that we have to deal with.
I think we can come up with one. Farhad.
Exactly. It's like very, very well stated. Thank you. But it's not more complicated than how our life become complicated. So that's why we should not put as a complicated. We have to work on it. Who done these conventions was people like us. Raphael Lemkin was the father of genocide term. He was refused for his first stated genocide term about Armenian genocide. And later, 75 years ago, he managed, which have helped after things happen. Okay? But prevention measures are not there. However, I wanted to give an advice to ourselves, like as a little experience I have. We, as a refugee leader, we should really focus on, I'm telling from my experience, it was very effective, mobilizing our communities. Sometimes we have like some people coming, they don't have houses in France, for example. Mobilizing the community, we can find houses so easily. Mobilizing the civil society. The ground is healthy. Policies are terrible. The ground is healthy. So let's not let the ground be terrible also. Honestly, it's really healthy. We saw like when this last war happened, injustice happened, millions of people stood, not governments, but millions of people, civil society stood against injustice for both sides, which is good. So this healthiness of the ground, I think we should take advantage of it. Giving a little example, when the Ukrainian displacement crisis happened, I was sitting down with my friends at Obama Foundation, said, okay, what should we do? I said, well, I mean, when I displaced, the first thing I was thinking about, a tent, a house, a place to stay, a bed, a floor. So we started a campaign called iCanHelp.host. We so far find 14,000 houses for 14,000 families and go beyond. I know one in Paris, he stated his home, but he mobilized all the neighbors through his home. So it's quite strange. An Iraqi refugee managed to find how many houses, and many other refugees have got through that. And we focus on also LGBTQ students were from in Ukraine, not necessarily were Ukrainian. So mobilizing civil society is not less powerful than changing policies. Thank you.
Yeah.
There are lessons from Coalición for Venezuela.
Yeah, it is. Thank you all so much. We have 15 minutes for questions. So any questions, any thoughts, reflections? You have great sources here. So this is your chance. Nasser. Okay, Nasser first, and then we have a question here. Nasser.
Okay, I'm Nasra Ismail, and I'm just so pleased to be really just sharing space with you. This is an education. So I'm almost sad that we didn't charge at the beginning.
Absolutely. I was thinking the same.
No?
This sets the bar.
Same.
Yeah.
4 years. I'm an older millennial, so forgive me. But I have two questions, and if you want to answer, it's totally fine. And if you don't, it's also good. But what are your dreams in the next couple of years for yourselves, not for the movement? And then the other question has to do with just something that I want to try, because I believe movements of the past speak to movements of today and tomorrow. I know with the gender and women's equality movement, we've learned to stop instrumentalizing women, because it's not on performance that we get into seats. Actually, we can fail, and that's perfectly fine. So I wonder, for future young leaders of movement, they may not even come into the room, but is it okay to fail, and how do you explain that, and how do you welcome that? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nasser. I think we're going to take another one, and then we will do 30 seconds response from each one, so we can take more.
I'll have mine of the One Goal Initiative for Governance. This initiative looks at the system in its entirety. And so the question that comes to me is, how will this situation evolve? And it seems that quantitatively it will get worse. And speaking about sustainability, how will that be sustainable in larger and larger and larger numbers, and more difficult otherwise political situations, or otherwise, I guess, operational situations where people need to, even the people who were in certain countries before any refugees came, are getting into more difficult situations. So how will this evolve? Thank you.
I think we're going to take one more before we answer. So any questions? Nada, yeah.
Nada Hilal from the Netherlands Refugee Foundation. Thank you so much for an excellent panel. I'd like to get back to a point you raised at the very beginning, Sana, but it's been just so interesting that I think I'd be glad to go back to the point of co-option. I think co-option is the responsibility of, if we go back to the question of power holders, who holds the power. What do you say to the government stakeholders, the donors who indeed you pointed to fear of giving power? What would be your direct message in terms of not co-opting, because it's very easy to turn things into box-ticking exercises, as we very often see. You know, here's a refugee on our panel, tick, next. Thank you.
Great questions. I wanted to get to that, so thank you, Nada. And I think one of the things when I think of co-option, I feel like, wow, they created the problem and they co-opt the solution. Like, it's not just that. So, but in any case, so let's go on around. You can respond to any of the questions about your dreams, about the sustainability of the organization, about the co-opting of the movement. I'm going to start with you, Matai.
Yeah, good question. So let me start with how the system will evolve. I would answer by saying that it depends on this room. You know, the next stage for the system really depends on these people in this room. I guess that answered the question. It's a very short answer. So the next answer that I want to speak about is the cooptation that she talks about. I think, for the states and other stakeholders at the local level, refugee participation has to be substantial, and if it is not substantial enough, then it goes the other way around. It also affects the state, so it's not good for them either. And for us as refugee leaders, when we get opportunity such as this, we need to, to speak to those realities that it's not enough to just be in the room, but it's very important, to engage critically and, look at those narratives and expose them for what they have. So I think that should be very important.
Answer the question around dreams, but also the increase over the last decade, there has been an exponential, as per rate, exponential growth in forcibly displaced people. I do not imagine that rate to decrease. I would imagine that rate will continue to decrease. But unfortunately, we're operating with a system that was designed post-World War II and a system that's ill-equipped systematically to be able to deal with the level of forced displacement that we're dealing with as a society. And so that's a distinct challenge. On the dream part, that's a great question. Refugees are not often asked that question. So I just want to honor the fact that we are lucky to be in, we have the honor to be in the space of someone like you who asked us that question, because we are often not
as well.
as a refugee as well. But it feels very much like there is that it's a consequential one, right? What are our dreams? And honestly, there isn't anything material that came to mind. But the one thing that I thought about immediately when you spoke was that, my family and I, me in particular, and my mother and my parent and my father, we are dealing with sort of tragic anxieties. We saw stuff. I have a niece now. She's 2 years old. I love her to death. Actually, let me show you something that I'm wearing Jordans because it's like my favorite sneaker. She gave me this small little tiny Jordan key, and I carry it with me everywhere I go. This is the thing that saves me. And I just hope that the tragedies of our anxieties don't make it to her. And that is a really, that's a mission of mine, not just a dream of mine. And then the point in and around sustainability, how many of you have a garden here? Plants, trees, come on. All right. When you buy, okay. Well, when you buy a plant, do you just water it once? No, you water it constantly, right? And so let's think about our funding models here, right? Let's think about how in which we fund them, right? So that's on the one hand. The other hand is that, speaking of the US context, reproductive rights and civil rights. The Civil Rights Act in the Voting Rights Act in the 60s, the 1960s, and then of course, Roe v. Wade in 73. What we saw in 50 years was the systematic undermining of those laws that ended up in front of a Supreme Court that then denied that. Why? Laws are passed at the federal level, but they are implemented at the state and local level. And we lost sight of that. And we saw the 50 years systematic degradation of the loss of reproductive rights for women that affect entire families, and then the voting rights of Black and brown populations, who now have to show up in volume to save the Democratic Party. So it's just about sustainability, right? And don't lose sight of the fact of the implementation and the strength of local and state actors. And so it's just to say that we need that spectrum. Anyway, I'll end there.
As for the question for governments, governments should take off these lenses about charity and poor refugees and start thinking about, true management of integration. And we're talking about growth of the host countries and also the prosperity of both nationalities, the newcomers and then the ones in the field. So this is all about. And honestly, those governments are making a fool of themselves. We give so much credit to governments, but they need to think on this as an opportunity to show how good it is to grow together. It's all about it. And my favorite punchline from Harden is that this is the right thing to do, but also the smart thing to do. So it should be all around. And as for dreams, I am a dreamer, even if I don't look like. But I mean, my dream is every Venezuelan's dream. I haven't found a single Venezuelan in every single of my trips that hasn't expressed its desire to get back home. All we want is getting back home. I want to go home. So in my dream, I want to go home and have, maybe a more easy job, maybe in front of a beach. But yeah, my dream is to Coalición for Venezuela to become this cultural NGO for those families with second and third generation of little Venezuelans abroad, to know about our roots and, become this, not a refugee-led organization. That's my dream. And that's the whole team's dream.
Oh, let me start with a dream. Well, let's dream together. Yeah. Well, every struggle, serious struggle in my life, I had a dream for myself, for my community, and for humanity as a whole. As a genocide survivor, I dream that we can one day live in a world where there is no genocide can happen. As a homeless person at one stage, I dream that everyone can have a floor over his head. As a person who do not have a paper, nationality, passport, legal status, I dream everyone will have equal right. And I dream and I dream and I dream. Our life is a dream, Madam Smile. My mom gave me a little thing during the genocide in the mountain, and I was always carrying with me. It was like little ring, strange one. And once my hand was broken, and I put it inside my apartment. And one day I was not in my apartment was broken too. And it was still, I don't know what they will do with it. And my mom been always asking me, where is it? And I always develop a lie. Each time I develop a lie. So, oh, she don't speak English.
You know it now.
But anyway, yeah. So for the progress, I think we are committed. We are working. We learn while doing it. That's how I started from bottom up. I remember I was a translator in a camp. I was so funny. I look to my email now, like 5-7 years ago, sending to organization. Like I speak like a big paragraph of introduction. I'm sure none have read my emails. So we get into now all of those paragraph, big page of introduction, thankfulness to us at the end. Something is become. I hope you do well. I hope my email find you well. So we learn while doing it. We are committed, and I think we will learn more and more, and we will face the challenge and do our part. At least I feel happy. There is the hope of continuation, and this is still strong. That's why we are here. Yeah, and there is curiosity. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. The question of how do we convince the people who are so fear or persistent because they're going to lose power is I think it's about ensuring that just by having us in this space, you don't give up anything from you. We just complement you to do the work that you do better together. So I think that is the way going forward. Also acknowledging that they do bring something. We cannot do this alone. I want to acknowledge that. Yes, they have been doing shitty job, but we cannot do this alone. But I think that's how we can address that. So my success indicator in the space of this movement will be, my dream will be, I've mentioned that I'm sick of seeing the same leader everywhere. So if I don't see that the next DRF, including myself, not taking up the space, will be success indicator for me. Also seeing in this meaningful participation and inclusion space, diversity, equity, across intersectionality, women, men, LGBTQ community, elderly people, disabled community, all this, if that is there, I will say that we are moving forward to the right direction. Also, one thing that I'm really glad that I'm here today is that I don't think it is usually the case that people from Global South, Global North, and Asia Pacific are on the same panel. As a human being, we are so invested in our own issue. We think I am the most vulnerable person. My cause is the worst, and the other. So that is wrong. That is absolutely wrong. So I'm so pleased that I am here as a Rohingya from Myanmar, far away from Asia Pacific region, standing in solidarity with my other brothers and sisters here from other part of the world, because it is our way forward, standing in solidarity. But I also have to tell you that it was very sad when this genocide against Rohingya happened in 2017. We didn't find so much of our brothers and sisters in different part of the world standing in solidarity with us. But I have to tell you that I have been in many different capacity, always in my power, stood in solidarity with everyone that I could, because I know what does it feel like to be oppressed. I know what does it feel like to be unwanted. I know what does it feel like to be a refugee in a state, being deprived from many things. So it is the way forward for us. I don't think we're going to go any way forward. We're like, oh, Israel versus Gaza versus Rohingya versus Kakuma. And no, it is not the way forward. The way forward is, yes, your problem is very important. You are very vulnerable. As you fight for your plight, it will not lose anything if you stand in solidarity with others as well, when and if it is possible. If we are doing that, it will be my success indicator for me in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Hafsar. Wow. I'm not going to evaluate because I'm sure this is your favorite panel from the... And I want to... This is not Chatham House rules. Take everything you heard here, tweet about it, talk about it, take it everywhere with you. And my dream is to witness the day where justice is served against all the war criminals that displaced us and their supporters. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you all for spending this time with us. Sana, thank you so much for facilitating such a rich conversation. And to all of the panelists also for sharing your experiences and your thoughts. It was incredibly valuable. Thank you to Refugees International and Asylum Access for partnering with us on this. And lastly, as the new humanitarian, I think for us, this is really just the beginning of the conversation, the beginning of our coverage. So please, sign up for our emails, follow us on social media, reach out to me, talk to us. We're going to be continuing this conversation in various formats in the days, weeks, months, years to come. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Eric.